Okay, the next fruit that we're going to look at is an orange. Okay, I have cut this orange in half, which normally we don't do. We just kind of peel and eat it. But if you cut it in half, you can see that there are all those different divisions. So if you're used to peeling out your oranges, you can kind of take the pieces out in wedges. Each one of those wedges is a carpel. Okay, so if we go around and count how many carpels are present in this orange, we will find that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, if I counted correctly. Yes, 11. Okay, usually they have anywhere between 10 or 12. So that's perfectly normal. It's not the same number. That's why it's pretty important that you know how to count these on your own. Okay. Number of carpels we just said was 11. The ovary position. Okay, so this is where we have to look at the fruit itself. So as you can see here on top, this is where the stem was. And you can see the little leftover sepals around it. Okay, so since the stem and sepals are on the same side, this is a superior fruit. Okay, this fruit just came from one flower, one ovary, so it is a simple fruit. And the floral part that gave rise to the fruit in this case is just the ovary. All right, we can go ahead and move on to another one. We have our plum here. Okay, and in the middle of the plum, okay, we have the pit or the endocarp. All right, you cannot see any different divisions in this. Okay, so this is a simple fruit that only came from one carpel. All right, ovary position. If we look here, we see the stem on this side, but we don't actually see the sepals. They probably fell off. A way to tell this is when we flip it over, we look at the bottom. Okay, it's nice and smooth. There are no places on there where floral parts could have attached to. So then we would just kind of note that the sepals were probably there, but are no longer there. So this is actually a superior fruit because the stem and the sepals would be on the same side. Okay, floral part that gave rise to the fruit is just the ovary. And this is, again, another simple fruit. Okay, we'll move on to our apple. All right, and if we cut our apple in half, you can see that it has 5 carpels. Okay, and it's easy to tell because you can just see the seeds there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is another simple fruit. It came from one ovary, but it does have 5 carpels. However, as I mentioned before, an apple has a core, okay? So you can kind of see around here, these little dots, that would indicate the ovary with the seeds. And then all this fleshy part out here would be the receptacle. So this is a simple accessory fruit. And the floral parts that gave rise to it are the ovary and receptacle. Okay, now we need to classify it as inferior or superior. So if we look, we can see our stem on this side. Okay, and if we look at the bottom of it, we can see right here are the leftover sepals. So this is in between the stem and the sepals. So it's an inferior fruit. Okay, next we will go on to our raspberry. So raspberries are a little bit different than the past 3 that we've looked at. The past 3 have been simple fruits. These are aggregate fruits, as mentioned in the PowerPoint before. So if we were to cut this open, we'd be able to see, if I can get this in here well, okay, each one of these little layers or little carpels has a little ovule in it, okay? So these are the multiple ovaries. They're kind of all fused together in the middle here. It all came from one flower, but there are multiple ovaries. And they each have their own ovules. And each of these is a fruitlet, as I mentioned before. Okay, so if we look at our regular raspberry, we can see that there are, little globs, and they are somewhat movable. Okay, if we look, okay, we can see the stigmas still coming out of them. All right. So the great thing about this is while we don't really think of raspberries as having a core per se, there's got to be something there holding them all together. Okay. Otherwise, they would just fall apart. So there is a thin layer in here of the receptacle, and that's where everything is attached to. So this is an aggregate accessory fruit, and the floral parts that gave rise to it are the ovary and receptacle. All right. Unfortunately, we don't have any leftover flower parts down here. Those usually stay on the vine when you pick these off. But as you can tell, this is where the stem would have been. All right. And we can see all the stigmas, but we can't see any leftover flower parts on this side. So it's pretty safe to assume that all the rest of the flower parts would have been on this side as well. So with the stem and the sepals on the same side, this is a superior fruit. All right. We can go on next to our strawberry. Just like the raspberry, this is an aggregate fruit, excuse me. If we cut it in half and look at it, this has a much clearer, much more defined receptacle, okay? So we can see the receptacle in the middle here. It almost looks like the tip of a candle that you see in pictures after they're drawn, right? So all this area is the receptacle. Out from the receptacle, each of these are the ovaries, okay? So this is going to be an accessory fruit made from the ovary and the receptacle, okay? And as I mentioned before, it's aggregate because while this is one ovary, these are all multiple little carpels. So if we turn this over, we can see all the different seeds on the outside here, okay? All the different ovules. Okay. As far as whether this fruit is inferior or superior, we can look here. On this side, we see the stem, right? Then we see all of these leaves, which are the sepals. And if we actually turn this over and look underneath the sepals, it's a little trickier to see, but you can kind of see right there, there are some leftover other flower parts, and those are actually the stamen that are on there. So in this case, you see the stem, the sepals, excuse me, and stamen. So this is also a superior fruit. Okay. Our last fruit that we're going to look at is the tomato. Right? This also came from one ovary. So this is a simple fruit. The number of carpels, if we look at this, you can see that this is, excuse my lab assistant. You can see that there are 1, 2, 3 carpels. Okay. And we looked at a picture of this earlier on the PowerPoint slide. Okay. So within these carpels, this area right here would be the ovules, okay, the seeds. This empty space would be the locule. And then where this attaches to the ovary wall would be the placenta. All right. So our little tomato here has 1, 2, 3 carpels. All right. If we were going ahead and look at the ovary position, we can see that this has the stem as well as the sepals. So since the stem and sepals are on the same side, it's superior. All right. And the floral part that gave rise to this fruit is just the ovary. And I think I forgot to mention, but back with the strawberry and the raspberries, I mentioned that these came from multiple carpels. Okay, each one of these is a carpel. So when it says number of carpels, for both of these, since they're aggregate accessory, you just write multiple carpels. Okay, you don't have to count them all. That would be a little bit on the torturous side. So, all right, thank you very much for watching. You can go ahead and start Dr. Fry's portion of the lab now, which is going to teach you about plant reproduction.